The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics says more than 800,000 women dropped out of the workforce in September, right around the time a lot of kids went back to school.
Women leaving the workforce in these numbers, it's a national emergency.
Many parents may have to choose between their jobs and their families, and that could have an especially big impact on women.
In December, the United States lost a total of 140,000 jobs. And women, we accounted for 100% of them.
So any economic recovery plan that this administration is putting forth has to put mothers at the center of it. I think that women are exhausted, they're tired, and they're desperately looking for some support and some help.
Hey, I'm Alison Morris. Welcome to our NBC News Now special, Elevate Success in the She-cession. It has been a rough year for working women, but let's be honest, have we ever had it easy? The Equal Pay Act went into law way back in 1963. Here we are in 2021, and it still takes us until the end of March to earn what men did the year before. But we haven't backed out or backed down. Even with all the setbacks of this pandemic, women still make up nearly half of the U.S. workforce. So whether you're sitting on the sidelines trying to work your way back in or overworked and need some help, let's find success in this she-cession together.
It's like you don't have money, so you can't afford childcare, but you don't have childcare, so you can't work a job to make money.
I have always worked.
I want to work. I do, but I want to be safe at the same time for my family as well.
Multiply those stories by nearly 4 million. That's how many jobs women have lost since February of 2020. No wonder this pandemic recession has been dubbed a she-cession. And the numbers are even worse for minorities or women with disabilities. Just look at the unemployment rates. 5.6% for women overall. That jumps to 7.5% if you're Latina, 8.6% if you're Black, 9% if you have a disability. But there are signs of hope this spring, and of course there are. Women never give up.
Although I was laid off, I didn't stay there because I upskilled myself and I took advantage of these types of opportunities in which we're trying to provide for other ladies.
I started creating this little flower stand at the end of my driveway, and now it's moved into a little bit of an e-com shop.
And minority women just might be driving our comeback. In a recent survey of about 1,200 women, 5% said they had started a new business during the pandemic, nearly half of them minority women. So ladies, let's get to it. Tonight we have some amazing female entrepreneurs and experts joining us to share their experiences and insights and help us pull out of this she-cession together, including Tiffany Aliche, the Budgetnista, who knows how to recession prep.
Automation is the new discipline. Split it before you get it.
MSNBC's Mika Brzezinski, who knows the value of asking your boss the right questions at work.
You want to create a scenario where you can put your best performance forward.
You'll also meet the college student whose business is fine jewelry and whose clients are famous. Now she's using her success to help other entrepreneurs.
During the pandemic, we were able to fund 4 new companies.
And the restaurant owner who's found success making vegan food sexy, even in the middle of a pandemic.
I was placed with a challenge that I'm going to hold on to these customers or I'm going to lose them, and I wasn't willing to lose them.
My first guests are 2 fabulous female entrepreneurs. Julia Collins, the first Black female to co-found a unicorn, a privately held startup valued at over $1 billion, Zoom Pizza. She's also the founder of the climate-friendly food startup Planet Forward. Dee Poku Spalding is the founder and CEO of the We Suite, short for Women, Inspiration, and Enterprise. It's a membership community and platform for female leaders and creators. She also founded Black Women Raise, a platform to help Black female founders get funding. What are the biggest challenges that you've dealt with at Planet Forward during the pandemic, and how are you keeping your business alive and thriving today?
One of the most challenging things that I think many women and parents faced this year was the reality of parenting while also building a business. You know, I think I was in a very fortunate position to have a lot of support, but the reality of having a 3-year-old and now another baby on the way was really heavy. And so just being able to manage all of that while also managing my team was incredibly challenging. And I'm excited to know about some of the work that Dee's been doing in particular to help uplift working women as we attempt to all keep all the balls in the air.
So, Dee, let's talk about this. You've spent your career helping women advance in the workplace. Since February of 2020, women have lost nearly 6 million jobs, according to the National Women's Law Center. The We Suite launched a 2 million Mentor Minutes initiative this spring. Tell us about that and how else you are trying to help bring millions of women back to work.
So, I was one of those women who had to navigate the pandemic. I already had my sort of full-time job and a child, and suddenly homeschooling was added to my plate, as well as, many other things. And it was certainly a struggle. What was interesting for me over the pandemic was just how much I saw women really pulling together. We really wanted to be that source of support for one another. We were sort of sharing sort of tactics and ideas. And that really was the spark for 2 million Mentor Minutes. I think that the issues that women are facing right now are issues that need to be tackled on a much broader level. They are issues of sort of equal pay and affordable childcare and sort of issues that really need to be tackled at a sort of governmental level. But I wanted to see what I could do as a woman in leadership who had access to a community. What could we all bring to the table? And so I tapped into my network and I said, what can we do? Like, we can give our time. But that's something that we had just a little bit of to eke out. And that's really where the 2 million Mentor Minutes concept was born.
Look, and you say a word that's so key, right? Community. Having a community to go through this with makes all of the difference. Julia, you are the first Black woman with unicorn status. That is so cool and huge. What advice would you give women who are trying to build their own businesses in the pandemic, whether it's something really small and local or the next billion-dollar idea?
It's a dubious distinction to be the first and only of anything, and although it is very much the case that I'm the first Black woman to have achieved this milestone, almost all of my energy goes into making sure that I'm not the last. And so I think one of the best things that women can do right now is to double down on community, to really deepen those relationships with other women who are at a similar stage to you, or maybe one step ahead in their entrepreneurial journey. It's really been my case that the times that I've gone the furthest, the fastest, have been when I've been in those moments where I have women like Dee shoulder to shoulder with me, moving me forward. So double down on your community and really deepen your relationships.
Dee, raising cash is one of the biggest hurdles for women starting a business. Investments in women-led companies took a pretty big blow last year. They dropped to their lowest level since 2017. Your advice for women, especially women of color who are trying to raise money now, because, look, we know the venture capital world, it can be very male still and very white.
It is very male and it is very white. And so, the trickiest thing about fundraising is it's all about relationships, which I think is sort of a theme of this conversation. It's so much about who you know, which is why so many women have difficulties raising money, because they're not in those very valuable networks. So the most important thing you can do is tap into your network and build your network from the outset. And I think that so much of fundraising is about warm introduction. So who do you know in your community you can support on that level? But also, what we have seen, even though it's been a sort of difficult time for founders, there are many more women who have been raising money at high levels. And what I have seen that's really wonderful is that women are now giving back. So those founders who are building wealth, and especially Black founders building that all too valuable generational wealth, and now the angel investors of the future. So they're putting that money back into founders who are coming up. So if you're trying to raise money, you have a great business idea, look around you, look at people who look like you, who are who have businesses that inspire you, and tap into them, see if they can be a support.
I cannot thank you both for being here today. I know one of the most important things for women, for girls, is to see other women, other girls who look like them, who act like them, who dream like them, having incredible success. I can't thank you for your advice and just for setting such a great example for women. We're going to get out of this She-cession. I know it. Thank you.
Yes, we are together.
Working parents like Julia and Dee have overcome so many challenges in the last year, but is help on the way? President Biden proposing 12 weeks of paid leave for parents, caregivers, and people who are sick themselves. NBC News political correspondent Aliche explains.
Dawn Hucklebridge's first year of motherhood nearly broke her.
I wasn't ready for what I faced.
She couldn't sleep or stop losing weight. But Dawn says she was lucky, able to take time with her newborn and time to heal.
I felt depleted in every way. But what I kept thinking is, if it's this hard for me, how hard must it be for all of the women or the people who give birth in this country?
Chris Garcia was his father's caregiver. His employer wouldn't give him more than a few days to be with his ailing dad, 900 miles away.
My dad's having like major surgery. He's having a quadruple bypass. Like, I really should be here. And he's like, well, there's nobody to cover your shift.
A few days later, doctors called Chris at work. Chris was forced to give permission to remove his dad from life support by phone.
It took me almost 8 years to be able to deal with like the guilt that I felt.
I wonder what having an actual paid leave policy would have done for your situation.
If I had had the policy in place at the time, I mean, it would have made a world of difference.
In a recent survey of 41 countries worldwide, only America lacks paid parental leave. Japan and Norway, for example, give new parents more than a year, paid, to be with their babies, while the U.S. gives 0. But a growing number of states, plus D.C. and Puerto Rico, have or will soon have some paid sick or parental leave policy. This year, when the pandemic laid bare the reality that illness can happen anytime, Congress passed emergency paid sick and childcare leave for some workers, but it was only temporary. Now, President Biden is pushing for something more permanent.
No one should have to choose between a job and a paycheck or taking care of themselves and their loved ones.
Biden's plan would guarantee workers 12 weeks of paid leave to care for newborns, aging loved ones, or even themselves after a serious illness. The plan would pay up to $4,000 a month and bolster the lowest paid workers. It's a lofty goal with a hefty price tag. $225 billion over 10 years, according to the White House, paid for by raising taxes on America's wealthiest. But to Dawn, who now works for Paid Leave for All and whose son is now 6, it's a check America can't afford not to pay.
What I think we should have learned over the past year is that at some point in our lives, every single one of us is going to need to give and receive care. We all are one diagnosis away from a crisis.
Aliche Vitale joins me now. Aliche, thanks so much for being part of our special. So what is the latest on the Biden administration's paid leave proposal? What needs to happen for something like this to become a reality for Americans?
Patience is going to be key here, Alison, because this is all part of that larger infrastructure package that the Biden administration has put forward. This is the second part of the plan, the American Families Plan. They're still stuck in Congress and between the White House on negotiating the first part of this plan, the American Jobs Plan. And there's actually debate right now, Alison, over if this and other policies like it actually qualify as infrastructure, because that's the big push the administration is trying to make right now. Republicans would argue that programs like paid leave as well as universal pre-K, they don't fit the bill for infrastructure. Democrats, meanwhile, they say it absolutely does. That back and forth is going on as negotiations continue over whether this package will pass. And advocates say that right now for paid leave, this is the time that they hope Democrats will strike.
And Aliche, let's just be clear. This isn't just for new moms, which would be wonderful in and of itself, but this is for a variety of family situations.
Yeah, Alison, it's a really important distinction and one that the Biden administration made when they first rolled out this plan. You can see it right now on your screen. The people who would qualify under this potential paid leave policy, it's new parents, and I'm emphasizing parents because that's not just moms, it's dads too, but also anyone who's caring for a seriously ill loved one or dealing with a loved one's military deployment, as well as finding safety from sexual assault or domestic violence, healing from a serious illness yourself, or recovering from the death of a loved one. All of this broadly is a redefinition of whose responsibility it is to care. We know that the pandemic has spurred this she-cession in large part because the onus of care largely falls to women. Policy can be a way to remedy that, and the Biden administration is aware that a paid leave policy could do a lot to do that.
Aliche Vitale, one of my favorite working women. Thanks for being with us. Hey, ladies, you don't need a degree to launch your own startup. Just ask our next entrepreneur, a Harvard undergrad who launched her business out of her dorm room. Shilpa Yarlagadda co-founded She-cession, a fine jewelry phenomenon that helps fund female entrepreneurs. Her pledge, a pinky promise that's reached celebrity status. Here's our conversation. We are so psyched to have you here. Thanks for being on News Now. You are a woman on a mission. You're trying to financially empower 1 million other women worldwide by 2025. You're still in college, if people can't tell by your sweatshirt, and we are in a pandemic. So what has the last year been like for you and your 3-year-old business?
Yes, well, thank you, first of all, for having me. I mean, it's been, of course, such a crazy time. I was at Harvard at the time when this happened, and we were just told not to come back to campus after spring break. And, you know, it was definitely a difficult time in the sense that I was completely between Boston and New York for school. But I think that's the whole thing about entrepreneurship, and really the mission that we're supporting is these pinky rings really represent a pinky promise to pay it forward to support women. And through 50% of the profits, we're funding seed grants for female founders and for companies that empower women. Actually, during the pandemic, we were able to fund 4 new companies. So it was definitely interesting adjusting to the remote world, but I think our impact has continued. I think just from the manufacturing standpoint, it became a little bit more tricky to deal with the logistics.
I have to ask, how are you able to start helping other businesses so early in your own business? A lot of startups can't do that.
Yeah, so I mean, first off, like I really started this company because I grew up in Silicon Valley and I noticed the inequities that women were facing, and that less than 2.2% of venture capital funding was even going to female founders at the time. So it was really important for me to think of a solution, and jewelry was something that, you know, I just grew up loving, especially due to my culture. And when I realized that the margins could actually be put to something really impactful, I started to think of how we could really make that difference. And, you know, it's less about like how much you're giving away versus the intention and the mission. I think, you know, you can't just think about impact once you're successful. I think you have to really think about it from the beginning so it can grow with your success. So in our first year in the business, we were only able to support 2 startups and the grants were much smaller, but over time that has really grown and been a really integral part of why we exist.
Hey, even 2 grants, 2 small grants are better than nothing. That's awesome. So let me ask, how did you get started and get this off the ground? And what advice do you have for other women who are trying to launch something of their own, but maybe they're thinking, it's the pandemic, this isn't the right time, or I don't have enough money, or I haven't raised any funding and that's impossible to do?
Yes, no, definitely. I mean, I actually think like when this business started, it was in some ways similar to the pandemic. I actually was dealing with a concussion and recovering from that. So I was actually just at home. And, you know, I think so often we feel this pressure to always have to seek more knowledge, to act on more things. But I think we're surrounded by so much inspiration already. You know, there's so much we can already do with what we know. And I think She-cession was really created because I was putting together a lot of my passions and a lot of my ideas to see how they could work together. And I think, you know, it could start with just a Google search. That's really how I did it. I just Googled, how do you make jewelry? I didn't know anything about it. And I think, you know, it was completely different than what I was majoring in. And my best advice would be like, Google things, do your research, but also find mentors. I think, you know, mentorship is such a beautiful thing to pay it forward. It's such a part of our mission and who we are, and something we're now trying to do in how we support other businesses. But it was really our early mentors who were celebrity stylists, who really understood fashion and luxury, that, you know, really positioned us to succeed in this industry, because that was knowledge we couldn't Google. So I think surround yourself with people who believe in you and that can teach you something new.
I love this. I Googled jewelry making in the pandemic and ended up making things for friends and family that they wear just to be nice to me. You Googled it and launched an entire business, one that also funds other women. I'm so impressed. All right, so I have to ask, how did Michelle Obama and Serena Williams start wearing your rings? Oh, and then Emma Watson and Nicole Kidman and Idina Menzel and Cynthia Erivo. I mean, you have some really huge stars rocking your jewelry.
Definitely. I mean, so much of it was organic. Like, I mean, I literally just wear these all the time, and so do all my friends. And I think so much of the time we would just find ourselves in a room, and it would either be me or somebody else on the team, and we'd directly pitch them, or sometimes it was through the stylist. I remember one of the girls on our team and I, we just went to New York right after our final exams in 2018, and we actually met Meredith Koop, who's one of our mentors now, and like little did we know that the next day we would just see Michelle Obama wearing the ring. And Jenny Wang from our team at the time just happened to meet Serena Williams, and as a result just pitched it to her. She wore it, she loved it. So it's just been really organic, and we can just really quickly explain the impact that we're making through our pinky and the promise.
Shilpa, so awesome to have you on here. Your jewelry is fantastic, and look, you're just showing women that they can do a Google search and launch their dreams too. You just have to start simply and keep the faith. Thanks so much for being part of our Working Women's Week. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Coming up, your boss wants you back in the office, but post-pandemic, your life at home might look a lot different. I'll get tips from Know Your Value founder Mika Brzezinski about how to successfully ask your boss for what you need at work. And vegan food in the South during a pandemic. One revolutionary restaurateur making it happen will introduce you to Slutty Vegan after the break. Our special Elevate Success in the She-cession continues in just a minute right here on NBC News Now.
We know the world that we live in. We know that there are disparities all across the world. So it's not a secret. We know that we come in having to fight harder than everybody else as a woman of color.
There was a rise and an increase of support for Black businesses over the summer. But I knew, as much as we want it to be normal, and that is the goal, to normalize buying Black, my goal of this summer was have a solution when the waves started to go down. If you have the big dreams, go after them. Build fearlessly, and take other people with you.
I had a 7-year-old girl coming here. She's buying all these books with her dad. She said that she wants to open a bookshop one day. I never had that reality when I was a 7-year-old little girl, right? But that's the reality moving forward, and that's why it is important for us to be at the forefront of business ownership.
Nearly half of Black-owned businesses wiped out by the pandemic, but one Black female entrepreneur is growing her plant-based eatery pretty quickly while lending a hand to her community. Her story coming up. But first, she is a New York Times best-selling author and the first Black woman to appear solo on the cover of Money magazine. Here's my conversation with America's favorite financial educator, the Budgetnista, Tiffany Aliche. So here we are in a pandemic. It is really tough to predict a pandemic, but you say that we can all absolutely prepare for a recession, and we should expect several in our lifetime. I mean, hell, I'm only 41 and I've already lived through 6. So how do you recession prep?
Well, first of all, hey, twin, I'm 41 as well. And so one of the ways that you do so is you recession prep by learning to live under your means, if possible, learning to set aside for emergencies, and learning how to activate earning more when you need to. So when I was a teacher, I used to babysit when I needed extra money, or I used to tutor when I needed extra money. So certainly we can not fully recession-proof our lives for some folks, but certainly make it a lot easier to manage and work our way through it.
All right, you have a new book out. It's called Get Good with Money, 10 Simple Steps to Becoming Financially Whole. What does becoming financially whole mean?
So financial wholeness is when these 10 steps come together to create a foundation that is not easily shaken, no matter what's happening externally with your money. So those steps are going to ensure that if there is a recession, if there is pandemic or quarantine, that you're able to not only survive through it, but also thrive through it.
Your book has a 10-step plan. I don't want to give away all the steps because I want people to go out and read your book. But hit us with a couple of them. What are some of the things you can sort of get started down the right path?
Well, first, let's talk about credit. So the Fico credit score, which is the score that's most used, ranges from 300 to 850. And people think they have to have an 850 in order to be offered the best interest rates, but that's not true. 740 is the beginning of a perfect Fico score. So at least if you get a 740, you'll be able to get the same interest rate as your friend with the 800. Another thing I want you to consider is I want you to consider learning to earn. This is a critical component of financial wholeness. We all have to know how to make additional money. Most of us have a traditional job. So create something that I like to call my Go Me folder. So the Go Me folder is whenever you helped directly or indirectly for your company to make money or save money, you keep it in your file in this folder. So when you go for your review or when you ask for a raise, you're able to say, here's how I can quantify why and how I should get a raise, right? And last but not least, estate planning. So many of us ignore estate planning because we're like, we don't have an estate, but you do. Do you have a bank account? Do you have a retirement plan or maybe a pension? Your beneficiaries, if you put them on those accounts, that is the beginning of an estate plan. You want to make sure should something happen to you that the people you want to have access to your assets do so easily.
We got to talk about being financially literate. This is something that's really important, but a lot of people, they can't afford an MBA or classes in finance. That's a big expense. How can you become more financially literate? How can you become more savvy on things like estate planning and all these topics that you may not know that much about? How can you do that on the cheap or even for free?
Well, I mean, not to toot my own horn, but you can go ahead and get good with money. Even if you can't afford the book, you can borrow it from your local library, right? But also not just that. I love podcasts. I have a podcast called Brown Ambition. You can listen to financially focused podcasts. You might have maybe your favorite financial educator has a YouTube channel like I do, and you can lean into it. You want to be mindful of who you follow on social media, really trusted sources, but you can tap into podcasts, YouTube channels, social media channels, and books via your library to get this additional information that is critical in this day and age.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I'm going to ask you for some parting words of financial wisdom. But before you give us those, can I get you to promise us that you'll come back? I just feel like you are a kindred financial spirit. We're the same age. We grew up in the same kind of background. You have fantastic advice. Our viewers need more from the Budgetnista. So can I pressure you to come back and see us again?
Yes, of course. I'll definitely come back.
All right. How about those parting words of wisdom?
So here are my parting words of wisdom. If you don't do anything else, I want you to consider integrating automation into your finances. Automation is the new discipline. You don't know how to budget? Ask your job to split it before you get it. Ask them to split your bank account or your paycheck into specific bank accounts so you don't have to worry about those transfers. Make sure that you are automatically saving, automatically investing for retirement, automatically donating if that's what you choose to do. But automation is the new discipline. Split it before you get it.
I love it. Split it before you get it. Set it and forget it. I love it. Tiffany, the Budgetnista, so awesome to have you on today. I can't wait to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
For those of us lucky enough to still have our jobs during this pandemic, work-life balance has taken on a new meaning. For many of us, women in particular, that balance has gone out the window. We are working from home, caring for family, juggling more in a single day than maybe we ever have before. So what if you have to go back to the office? Or what if it looks like you never will? I talked to Mika Brzezinski, Know Your Value founder and co-host of MSNBC's Morning Joe, about everything from asking your boss for what you need at work to making sure you're still involved if work from home is your new normal. Mika, thank you so much for being here. You have been so open about all the things you've been juggling during this pandemic, in particular, caring for your mom, your beloved Bamba, who's in her late 80s. What have you learned over the past year, and how are you living your life differently now?
Oh, I have learned to slow down in many ways. And when it comes to caring for my mom, it really is a matter of sort of understanding her all over again. I moved her down to Florida. I moved her close to me. And Alison is a little different than I think, like most moms. You know, they pack their like beloved dishes and their necklaces. My mom, it was 2-ton tree trunks, 18 chainsaws, 3 axes, and a whole set of chisels and wire brushes. So we had to set up her studio down here. And then after kind of like getting her career where it should be, realizing that she was slowing down, she got diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And so I had to understand her at a whole new level and lower my expectations and start all over again. And actually, when you're dealing with a parent with dementia, the best thing you can do is just lower the bar, keep it simple, keep it positive, and actually within that advice, it gets better.
Mika, I know that must have been really hard, but I love seeing on Instagram when you and your mom just sit down for a glass of wine together after you've had a long day at work. She's been working on her art. It's really nice to see that. Last September, Mika, you wrote a piece about resetting during the pandemic and asking your boss for what you need. What is the best way to ask your employer for more flexibility? And are there any updates you would add to that advice over the last 9 months?
Yes. First of all, Alison, you just ask. You ask. Yes, you ask the question, and it seems so hard. But think of it this way. Think about you want to create a scenario where you can put your best performance forward, bring your best value to the company. So you want to, in that conversation, give the benefit that the company would have out of maybe adjusting your hours or working on weekends or working at night. Talk about why it would be better for them, what more they would get out of you, what value you'd be able to bring to the table. At Know Your Value, I talk about this with the Know Your Value community all the time. The big ask. I call it the big ask. You know why? Because to women, it's especially Black and brown women, it is a frightening thing to do. It is the big ask, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. It should be as simple as having a conversation. By the way, they can always say no. If the no is a really like non-constructive no, then you have a bigger issue with the job itself. But chances are, if you're good and you bring value to the table, they want to hear what it is that they can do to retain you, to keep that work coming at them. And, you know, I call this sort of an information gap. For women, especially Black and brown women who are falling off during this pandemic, who are falling off in general as it comes to sort of leveling up in their career. They get to a certain point and then, you know what, they can't do it anymore. Life interrupts their work and they can't get back in. We have to stop that. And that information gap goes both ways. Number one, the women need to learn to have these conversations without them being traumatic. What's the worst that could happen? You can always ask, but also you have to be, Alison, you have to really get comfortable talking to your boss and to your manager about your life without it being too much information, but about what works, about what you love, about how much more you want to do, perhaps. And then, you know, that conversation can easily, naturally veer into how it could work better during this pandemic or permanently, what you've learned about how you can bring more work to the table if you're working at home. And then managers need to do more to find out what great talent needs to stay happy in their jobs, to be comfortable doing their work and also having their lives.
Mika, you mentioned work from home. A lot of companies considering that long term. How can women make sure that they are still really involved from home and that they're not missing valuable face time with their bosses and their colleagues?
Well, yeah, I think you have to be persistent. I think you should email your boss I mean, it depends on the job. It might be a manager. It might be a supervisor. I mean, I don't know if you're emailing the CEO of a company if you're starting out in your career, but those who are above you, you ought to stay in touch, even if they don't write back. And you can send an email a week. You can reach out, maybe do a monthly Zoom catch up with your manager or supervisor. But, you know, I was interviewing the CMO for Prudential the other day for my Women in Charge series at knowyourvalue.com. And she had great advice, especially in the first, second, or third job of your career. Meet with people around your company, above and below you, of all backgrounds. Meet with people that you wouldn't necessarily meet with. Step outside your comfort zone. She got the most amazing promotion from a random meeting that she had years ago that was the biggest promotion of her life. So when you're starting out in that first, second, or third job, you're in the middle of your career, start thinking of people that you would meet with that you wouldn't necessarily immediately think of. And practice having conversations, understanding their background, their point of view, where they come from. I mean, your workplace is an opportunity to spread your wings and to learn about people from diverse backgrounds. But if you can't kind of talk to people very comfortably and sort of go in places where it's maybe a person you wouldn't necessarily talk to, that's valuable time wasted. You want to really establish yourself in your company, and for people to know you, you have to step outside your comfort zone and start those conversations.
Mika, how about women who aren't working right now, who are watching this and maybe they've left the workforce because they got laid off or they had to just leave to care for their family and now they need to or they want to get back in? What's the best way to network to try to land a job or an interview, especially if you have to do it virtually right now?
Okay, so this is going to be tough. Look at this number. This is incredible. We are in a crisis for women and a crisis for mothers and a bigger crisis for Black and brown women. And I learned a lot during my research for comeback careers. That was focused more on women over 50 who were aged out, who wanted to get back in, and they were dealing with perceptions. This is now a crisis of all ages. And the reality is a reset often involves not getting the same job you had. And while that may not be fair, when you have left the workforce and you are trying to get back in, there are many different ways you can get back in, and none of them are going to be perfect. So first, I say, open your mind. Open your mind to understanding that this is going to be a process of reentry, and it's going to be hard. But you've got to cast a wide net. You have to understand that, in a way, if you've lost your job, it's a step back. I lost my job at CBS. I was working at the network level for 60 Minutes 2 and anchoring on the weekend on the network. And the job that I took a year later, after looking and looking and looking and looking and looking, was a job I wouldn't have even considered 15 years before. It was reading cut-ins on the overnight at MSNBC. But that job was some way back in that put me in place for what ultimately happened 6 months later, which was Morning Joe. So you have to be ready to do something, to take something just to get back in the door or to get back into doing something to keep your brain active, to keep that sort of mindset of working going. So it's a big reset in terms of the how. Apply everywhere you can. Have Zooms, knock on doors if they'll have you, wear a mask, of course, get your vaccination, and show up for any interview that you can get, but they're doing them on Zoom. And in some ways, you might find that you'll get more interviews because they can pack more people in. The question then will be standing out on Zoom, being ready to jump, being ready to take that job, and not sort of being encumbered by what you had and having that kind of stilt your language. You've got to be ready, open, and willing to work and willing to start all over again.
And know that you're not alone. Mika, I hear you share that story. I got laid off from my very first job and ended up taking a freelance gig at a local TV station that doesn't even exist anymore. It was real, real budget, but it got me back in the game. And sometimes that's just what you need. Mika, thank you. You always help us realize a little bit more of our value, know our value better. We're really grateful for you.
Thank you.
Like Mika, Pinky Cole has had to reset several times. The entrepreneur started with a food truck in 2018. Just 3 years later, she is transforming the Atlanta food scene with her plant-based burger joint, Slutty Vegan. But she's serving up more than just burgers. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson spoke with Cole about how she's using her business empire to initiate change.
People would come with lawn chairs, with their computers. They would stand outside for 8 hours at a time just to patronize my business. And at that point, I realized that it was bigger than burgers and fries. I started Slutty Vegan August 2018. All the vegan restaurants in Atlanta closed at an early time. And I was really just solving a problem. I wanted something to eat.
With that, Pinky Cole began researching recipes and putting together a plan for a brand new vegan spot.
I had the ghost kitchen for about 2 months, and then I got kicked out. And I was placed with a challenge that I'm going to hold on to these customers or I'm going to lose them, and I wasn't willing to lose them. So I paid for a food truck.
A food truck that soon blossomed into a brick and mortar restaurant.
And on the day of my grand opening, I had about 1,200 people outside, and I couldn't believe it.
That's one of the things that I've been most struck by is that you do have lines out the door at your restaurants, and it's a lot of black folks.
Again, I'm in the heart of the South. These people want vegan food because they have fell in love with the experience. We're going to laugh with you. We're going to have loud music that speaks to the culture, and we do that intentionally. And by the time you walk out these doors and eat the food, you won't even realize that you had food that didn't compromise a dead animal, and that is the agenda.
Cole says the name has also played a role in her success.
It literally was a way to merge two most pleasurable experiences in the world, right? So that's sex and that's food. I wanted people to see vegan food in a different way, right? For years, people see vegan food as something just healthy, flavorless. I wanted to redefine it.
Then, little over a year and a half after opening, the whole world stopped.
There were so many decisions to make, right? As an entrepreneur, do I open? Do I close? Do I remain socially responsible? Do I listen to the governor? Do I listen to the mayor? I stopped down on my business for 2 weeks. I assessed the operation. I paid my employees during that time, and we put a plan in place.
And the business kept growing.
I've been able to open up 3 locations in the middle of a pandemic with lines still down the block. I've been able to partner with big businesses like Shake Shack, Impossible Food, and I'm very grateful about that. I don't take that for granted because I understand that there's so many businesses that have not excelled through the pandemic.
I also want to talk about your philanthropic work.
I just like to help people. Like that to me feels better than money in the bank. I've seen my mother doing it growing up as a Jamaican woman, not having much, humble beginnings, but she would help anybody who needed help. Pinky Cole Foundation was really a way to bridge that generational wealth gap.
Through her foundation, Cole has helped pay tuition for 30 graduating seniors at Clark Atlanta University and helped provide scholarships to the children of Rayshard Brooks after he was fatally shot by a police officer in a Wendy's parking lot last summer. And that's just the start.
The community is who serves you, and the community is who supports you, especially when things like a pandemic happen. So it's my duty and obligation to make sure that I always give back to the community.
Was there ever a moment where you thought this might not work out?
Absolutely not. I'm a hustler. I saw how hard my mother worked. I've witnessed my father do over 20 years in prison. So, like, failure is not an option for me. Once upon a time, people in the South, black people, some black people especially, wouldn't eat vegan food, making it so normal, like a regular cheeseburger and fries. And in 50 years, the goal is to be able to save the world by having people eat less animals.
We spoke with some pretty amazing women for this special. I want to thank all of them and you for joining me. I'm Alison Morris. The news continues right here on NBC News Now.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.